Welcome back to the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul, where tonight the business of being Black is literally being Black. Yes, what makes us us? I was thinking to myself, do Black people code switch even when they're not speaking? I was saying, I'm like a punk ass revolutionist. Because in California, Los Angeles, where I've lived for about the last 15 years, I would wear a Black Lives Matter t-shirt. But I'm born and raised in Houston, Texas. And I've gone home to Houston on many occasions and looked at my surroundings and kind of felt like I needed to cover my jacket up over my Black Lives Matter t-shirt. That's a punk ass revolutionist. All right, am I really ready to die for the fight? But I think that Black people have to kind of be chameleons in a sense, or do we have to be chameleons? Can we stand on what and who we are and our principles and our beliefs and our values? Dexter, you're thinking hard and breathing hard about that thing. Let's go.
I mean, you took me to about 5 different places. I'm gonna try to go through a couple of them, right? But no, I mean, I'm one of those people that I don't know that I necessarily agree that there are inborn DNA things, shall we say, that make a Black person Black, right? I don't really subscribe to that. I feel that's a little bit too essentialist for me. However, I will say that there are experiences that 99.999% of Black people will experience, especially in the United States. And one of the main ones is being expected to adapt, right? To bend, right? And so it is something that there is a chameleon aspect, I think, to, if we can say something like Black culture, 100%, right? You know that you may need to change your voice from how you talk at home to how you talk at school to your white teacher, right? And this is something that a lot of Americans, the majority of Americans, don't actually have to think about because it's never life and death for them, right? And so I would definitely say, yeah, there is 100% a chameleon aspect to Black American culture.
Yeah, growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood, do you feel like you've ever had to play that chameleon?
Oh, all the time. I mean, I think for Black people, adaptability is also a question of survival. So it's not necessarily just a question of making yourself more palatable for other people or fitting in. It's also a question of, am I going to make it out of this situation? And I like Tammy's example of feeling like in certain situations, wearing Black Lives Matter feels different in your body than it does in other situations. I remember, speaking back to Dexter's experiences in Japan, when I was in Italy, I spent 3 months there working with an opera company, not as a singer, so don't ask me to sing. I was a stage manager, but I was there, and I remember going into a cafe, and I formed like a friendship with the guy who owned the cafe. We talked in the mornings and such. And one day I was in my purse looking for some change, and he reached across the counter and put both his hands into my afro. And everyone around him was just kind of staring as if to be like, what does it feel like? They just wanted to know. And I remember in that moment, I laughed it off and shrugged it off because I was afraid in some ways. I'm like, this large man is holding onto my head. He's, feeling my skull, like, other people are looking on. And so I adapted in that moment, not because I necessarily felt like it was the best thing to do, but because I was upset. And it was a way of me protecting myself from that encounter. So I
like to say, look, the boldness of having an afro being brought up in a predominantly white neighborhood, that's boldness. That's being who you are. And I think that's what every Black person really wants. We just want to be who we are, how we are, without having to shift and become chameleons. So the New York Times and many other publications have reported that trauma can actually alter a person's genes and be passed down to a person's offspring. How has our ancestral trauma manifested itself in us, Stacey?
Well, I think that it's manifested itself in us in the ways, very subtle ways, and then also very tangible ways. When we think about for example, a breast cancer diagnosis. So myself, I have had a breast cancer diagnosis. And when I was coming through it, my doctors, they pointed out to me that there was this gene, right? They're like, here's a gene that mutated, right? That is somehow corrupt or somehow broken. And this is a gene that I inherited from my mother, who apparently inherited from my grandmother. But my question is, where did it get broken? And how does a gene break? And that if a gene can break, right, that is going to make me more susceptible to breast cancer, right, say than the average other Black woman my age, then can I begin the process of repairing it, right? And so when we were talking earlier about like how do we perform our Blackness, you know, or like do we need to like how do we perform our Blackness? I think that when we pack down and deny parts of ourselves, that we're also kind of feeding into that, right? Yeah. We're feeding into those things that we'll end up holding on to, that will manifest itself in a very negative way. Our ancestors had to do it. They literally had to do it. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's part of the lie. The lie is that you ain't got to do nothing, right? And I'm not saying don't eat. And I've taken this stance before on the show, and some of the panelists, they didn't like the fact that I want to hold Black people accountable. I do, right? Because we are our only hope. That's it. We're our only hope. So
we should definitely be accountable. Douglas, interesting to hear what Stacey says. Her breast cancer was probably a product or byproduct of a gene being broken down the line. So does that equate to Black trauma of our ancestors putting us in traumatic positions as well?
Well, I really, love the way that Stacey said, we are all we have, right? That is such a powerful way of thinking about it. And yeah, I think one of the things that this long trajectory, this long history, this long root of trauma that runs right down through the soil of this country has taught us to be innovative. I can't help but think about Tupac in one of my favorite songs by him, Mama's Just a Little Girl. He's talking about, at the end, he's kind of just talking, and he's talking about the rose that grows through the concrete. And he says, don't ask me why, thank God, ask me how. And in his metaphor, the rose is African Americans, and the concrete is the displacement, the disenfranchisement, the economic, social, political, spatial, physical dislocation, the health dislocation of a continuously evolving racial caste system. And so the concrete is this physical manifestation of the many things trying to keep that rose from reaching the sunlight. But we still do. We still reach the sunlight. We still find, even if we're not allowed to use the normative routes to the sunlight, we find our own way. And so I think this trauma is really, it's affected us in many ways. We could have an entire show where we talk about that. But one way that I would say is a positive thing, that has made us innovative, it's made us adaptive. That's a really important part of what makes us us.
So
I want to add,
go ahead, please.
I just want to add on transformative, right? Also, that we also transform. That's what Black folks have done. We transform things. We have taken what we've been given and transform it, especially our trauma, right? Blues, jazz, arts, writing, poetry. It's so that we don't have to suffer it alone. Number one, we know that we're not alone. We can share it with somebody else. Maybe somebody else can learn from that trauma and it'll help them to heal. We wouldn't have the Black Lives Matter movement if it weren't for the trauma of listening to George Zimmerman being set free for the murder of this young boy. It just sent people out into the streets that day. That was traumatic, and it's a cultural memory, right? And then which goes back to Mamie Till. That was traumatic to see her son Emmett Till destroyed that way, and as a mother, right, who has a 13-year-old son who my mother lives in Mississippi today. I have land in Mississippi now, right? That how close that feels to me, and to know that her son went down there and he came back this pope, but she put him on display for the world to see, right? She shared that trauma, which, as we know, kind of helped to ignite like the urgency of the civil rights movement taking its move in 1955. So I just love that we can transform our trauma, because it can kill us. We know this, right? And it's trying to.
And it has.
And it has.
It has. Douglas, I want to go right into this hip hop kind of theme that you set for us here. OJ Simpson allegedly once said, "I'm not black, I'm OJ." Obviously, Jay-Z put it in his song, "I'm not black, I'm OJ." Okay. Yet when he was on trial for murder, Black people swore of his innocence like he was their grandfather. And even to this day, if you say OJ did it around too many Black people, you'll likely have a heated discussion on your hands. Are Black people too loyal, Dexter?
Black people too loyal. You know what? I think that I think it could certainly happen. And I have been I've been disappointed in some people who say we're really just out there riding for Bill Cosby. Look, I get it, but come on, man. Like Dr. Huxtable is not Cosby, right? But no, I don't. I think that it's good to be careful about painting too many Black people with such a broad brush, because people's opinions really are diverse. And I think there are so many disagreements. I mean, I think if you really get down to it, we'll all really vehemently disagree on something in here. And
but
I think,
Dexter, I have to give you pushback on this.
Sure.
When the OJ Simpson trial happened, there was a clear racial divide.
Sure.
Crystal clear racial divide. OJ Simpson was a hero in the white community as well as obviously a hero in the Black community. Why did Blacks stay so loyal to OJ? Tommy, I'm gonna take it to Tommy.
Okay.
I mean, I honestly think that I agree. I think sometimes Blacks are too loyal, but I think in the sense of we have to understand that what's the mission? What are we trying to do? And that some people might not always be on that same mission and what we're trying to do. And we can't write them off. We just have to understand that it's just like you have different friends that are in different categories. Some friends may not be the ones who are going to ride with you and try to make the difference. They still Black folk, but they may not be the ones who are trying to make the difference that you're trying to make the difference in. So you might have to find someone else that you align with. And, you know, in that situation, if someone, like you say, is not going to support what the long-term mission is, then, you know, for me, it's like, I don't necessarily think that I have to be loyal to them. Would you be loyal to them if they were somebody of another race?
I mean,
Well,
I think maybe
go ahead, Dexter.
I think maybe the other important thing is that trial was quite some time ago, right? And not to put too fine a point on it, but how often did we hear from Black people back then? And how often did we hear from various diverse Black people's opinions right now, right? We didn't have Twitter at that point. We didn't have Instagram at that point. We didn't have social media at that point. And so it wasn't as easy for a whole bunch of people, Black people, to say, you know what? You who live in Tennessee and me who live in LA, and actually a whole bunch of us, we actually don't ride with this dude. This is not our savior. We're good. We get it. We understand the institutional racism, but maybe this is not the hill to die on. And so I think it's much easier now for us to realize that, wait, not all Black people really agree with each other. I think it's much easier to realize that now than it might have been in the 90s.
Yes, and I also want to add that this case comes, not long on the heels of the Rodney King case.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And so Black folks felt, this was, again, another traumatic, a public execution or a public beatdown, which we know escalated to executions or rebounded back to executions. We've witnessed this, but,
I've always said about this whole OJ Simpson trial, though, as long ago as it was, that the trial for Black people was never about OJ Simpson, the individual. The trial was about the justice system and how the justice system could work for white men, but never work for Black men. And in this one particular case, this one particular time, it had finally worked for a Black man. And that is what Black people, I believe, were really championing, was a justice system that finally had their back, regardless of whether OJ was guilty or innocent. And then I'm gonna add to that, white folks sure be riding for Trump, but I'm gonna go to break on that. Y'all ain't gonna let Black folk ride for somebody, but the white folk be out there riding for Trump. Okay.